Welcome to another episode of the Color in Cannabis podcast. We're super excited to be back here for the start of season 2 with the guest that we definitely wanted in season 1, so we're very stoked to have her here today, Salwa Ibrahim.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've always wanted to have you on this podcast. You've been such a pioneer in our space. I've known you for many years from your work with Richard Lee at the Oaksterdam, through having Cookies Oakland, Blum, all these different businesses you've had. And so just super excited to be able to tell your story because you've worn so many hats in our space.
I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. I know a little bit about your story, but I'd love for you to be able to tell the viewers kind of how you got your start in cannabis and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I was an Oakland girl, and during like the mid 2000s, like Oakland was where it's at when you wanted to be in cannabis. And so I got my start. Actually, I was working for a developer, and we were redoing the Oakland Fox Theater. And the second largest private donor behind Bank of America was Oaksterdam and the cannabis clubs that were around the theater. And at that point in time,
it was a mess.
It was a mess. It was a total hot mess. And so basically we had all of these cannabis businesses that would spring up in downtown, and they were bringing in a lot of foot traffic, and they were bringing on a lot of business. Mm-hmm. And so the city kind of was like, oh, well, this isn't such a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And so they basically started allowing them to be and allowing them to exist. Mm-hmm. And so they created the first ever permitting process. And so I was watching this as I was doing the construction project at the Fox Theater. And once we got the theater up and running, I had gotten offered a job by Richard Lee being his assistant and helping him with the Prop 19 campaign. And so I, at that time, foolishly was like, well, that sounds easy enough. I was like, that's got to be easier than what I'm doing. And so I, after we built the theater, left that and then started working for Richard Lee. And it's been consuming my life ever since.
That's amazing. We didn't really talk about this in the pre-talk a lot, but I remember Richard Lee distinctly from just being just a luminary in the industry and just doing a lot of positive work, kind of getting us to where we are today. You want to talk a little bit about him and what he did, was he able to do?
Yeah, it was actually really amazing what he was able to do. He basically, from that thought process of like essentially like having these businesses sort of throughout Oakland, creating this foot traffic and basically allowing revitalization to happen just by having people be present. Mm-hmm. He really took that philosophy to the next level. So he had his university on one block. Mm-hmm. He had the nursery on another block. He had the Bulldog coffee shop on another block. He had the museum on another block. Mm-hmm. And so even just the staff going from like one place of business to the other, like the amount of foot traffic that we were able to create in downtown Oakland that wasn't there prior to it was really kind of changing the area. Mm-hmm. And it allowed for restaurants to pop up, it allowed for other small businesses to pop up, and it essentially like revitalized this entire area of Oakland. And it was really thanks to him.
Yeah, it's something I didn't think about. Because I left for college in like the mid 90s and came back in 99. And where Oaksterdam was beforehand, it was desolate. Yeah. Like that part of Telegraph and like where the Fox Theater always was, that whole area was just, it was tumbleweeds going down there. It wasn't safe. There wasn't a lot of things going on. All the department stores had closed around there. And I remember coming back, seeing all the little cannabis clubs popping up and just seeing a flurry of activity around there. And it was years later that part of Telegraph started having all the restaurants, all the bars, and now that's the most popular part of Oakland on the weekends, kind of a thing. And I didn't really see the connection between the cannabis industry kind of bringing that back. Do you think that was instrumental in helping the Fox Theater do what they were doing, just that amount of foot traffic in that area?
I think it went hand in hand, and I think it was very deliberate. So to your point, there was a 3-alarm fire at the Fox Theater because the homeless people occupied it, and there was like, they were trying to keep themselves warm. Yeah. And so essentially like there was no plans to revitalize that, but the developer saw an opportunity, and essentially like Richard Lee saw an opportunity being like, oh, that sounds great. Having live concerts here again, like that's great for our business. It's great for our community. And so like in one way, they kind of worked hand in hand in that sense, where they, again, were like such a large donor to that project. Yeah. But I think the idea of just having stuff for people to do and just bringing people in and being an attraction of some sort was what that area of downtown Oakland needed.
Yeah. I mean, it changed. It really felt like it changed downtown Oakland, because even Broadway as a whole was really going downhill in the late 90s and early 2000s. So just the influx of people, and then the more bars and restaurants started popping up around there, and it started just kind of like awaken that part of Oakland, and kind of, I mean, gentrification was happening at the same time. But I just didn't think about how much that the cannabis community in that space really helped revitalize downtown. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. No, it was brutal. And look, like it was brutal back then. And you would hear stories of, you know, people unfortunately being victims of violent crimes in downtown Oakland during certain hours. And your thought wasn't, oh, you should catch those guys. Your thought is like, well, what were they doing down there during those hours? Like, you shouldn't even be there, right? Which obviously is conditioning, right? And so I think that it was such a beautiful opportunity at that time, and like the growth that we all saw of how much flurry and activity was happening in downtown Oakland between, like, I don't know, 2010 to 2014. It was just like Oakland was the place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So so how long were you at Oaksterdam, and what did you do there?
I was the assistant to Richard Lee, and so what that meant was that I would help oversee all the different businesses. I cut checks. I made sure everybody was like kind of taken care of. But for me as a skill set, like I was able to see how one kind of fed the other, and which departments were more important than the others, and which ones were more for media and pushing a specific media agenda to get as much attention as possible on our issue, which was advancing cannabis policy and getting people out of jail, right? And so some of these things were like publicity stunts, right? Like, so Oaksterdam University was one of them, right? He put out an ad in the paper saying like, oh, cannabis college, like, you know, and not thinking it would really go anywhere. And turns out it like totally blew up, and it became this media sensation.
I was actually in the second graduating class from Oaksterdam. I guess for folks that don't know, like, Oaksterdam means different things. Oaksterdam is a term that people use to describe the cluster of cannabis businesses that were in one area of Oakland. It's okay. And then, but then there's also the university that Richard Lee founded. And we taught classes on how to grow, just how to be in the business, legal classes, and really kind of help normalize cannabis for a lot of people. Like I said, I was in the second graduating class. And I think the biggest benefit of being there wasn't so much what I was learning from the individual teachers. It was just to be in a room of 40 other people that were either growers or wanted to be growers or wanted to be in the space, and talking to people from 18 to 60 and just their different experiences with cannabis. It just really created a network, helped really create that community. So I think, and in the framework of a school, just kind of gave it a different kind of flavor. So I think that was really important that it existed.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about Oaksterdam University was how many people were coming in from all over the world. Yeah. I remember in the beginning, we would have like a map of the U.S. and it was like, you know, you'd put a pin from where you were from, and then you started seeing people like writing in the margins in the ocean, like you know, what countries they were from, and then very quickly we had to graduate to a world map, you know, and even that in and of itself was helping revitalize Oakland, because you were getting people getting, you know, flying in and like spending money in hotels and like doing all these things. And just that in and of itself was like revitalizing Oakland.
And I think it did a huge job in terms of help normalizing cannabis for the Oakland City Council, for them to realize, okay, it isn't just these fledgling businesses selling pot out the back door making a bunch of money. It was actually a school. People were coming in from the outside. This is a business. This is a policy initiative. This is about medicine. This is about access to medicine. This is about so many more things than just getting high. And I think for a lot of people in the city council, before the existence of Oaksterdam, this was just a bunch of people getting high, and they kind of just let it happen. Whereas when they actually see this is actual real movement, this is something that matters, I think that was really important in terms of that.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And destigmatizing it was really important, but also in addition to that, he was able to create so much media and so much, there was a huge media frenzy at that time surrounding Oaksterdam, and these outlets would in turn want to interview the politicians and the mayor and things like that. So they were getting all this attention, which, you know, our politicians love attention. Yeah. So it was a win-win in that regard. But also, just absolutely normalizing it.
I think also optically it was really important that he was in a wheelchair, that this was someone who was, whatever, even if you didn't know his situation, you know that there was a medical issue going on there. And the fact that he was still out there fighting the good fight, going up and down the street. And you see him rolling up and down the street all the time between the different businesses. But I think it also it changed. It reminded the city council that this is a medical issue, that cannabis as medicine, which is something that we've kind of lost today in the whole recreational market era. But the fact that this is medicine, this is vital for people's survival, and this is vital for people having access to it. And so,
yeah, I think in addition to that, it was really easy to get behind him, right? For somebody like me with my background, I'm like, that's somebody who I want to get behind because he's pioneering this and advancing this cause for medical purposes or recreational, but specifically for medical. Yeah. But it was really easy for me to like get behind him and like support him because of that.
Yeah. Just not know the capitalist trying to make money is someone fighting the good fight.
Fighting the good fight, has a good reason for it, has a good reason to be using it, has a good reason to like, be advancing the cause. He was a really good poster child, if you will, for our movement at that particular time.
I loved him
because you couldn't argue with it. No. You know,
and not with him either. He was very, very good at getting his point across. Yeah. He was very eloquent. So after Oaksterdam, what was the next step?
So I was with Oaksterdam until we got raided. We got raided by the FBI, the DEA, and the IRS.
I remember.
Yep. Yeah. And then, but I had already applied for my own dispensary license. And so I got awarded, basically we got raided and I got awarded my dispensary permit within like months. Mm-hmm. But I was still like hiding under my covers. Yeah. You know what I mean? I was too scared to go outside, you know? And I just remember calling the city administrator at the time being like, hey, I appreciate that I got awarded this thing, but like, I'm too scared to open up my store. And he basically was like, oh, look, like you either got to use it or lose it. Like we're going to give it to the next person. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to another cannabis attorney at the time and I was explaining to him how scared I was to proceed. And he basically was like, oh, well, at the end of the day, you're doing this for the patients. And so the patients still need access to medicine and they need a safe place to purchase it. So you have to think of them.
It's a good lawyer.
Yeah.
Kind of keeping you on track.
I mean, and that's fair. And that's essentially what it took. And it was so interesting because at that time, it was like every single person I talked to was like kind of trying to dissuade me from opening. I remember being in my store and Vince Credelli at the time, he was like the fire chief. And he was like, oh, you're too pretty to be opening up a dispensary like this. What guy has you, like, he thought I was getting propped up by something else unless he couldn't imagine that somebody like me would be opening up a dispensary. And it was interesting how many people sort of forced their own perceptions and their own things on me, but you had to like stay super strong. And I'm like 27 at the time, you know, like, what do I know? So it was a scary time, but we did it. We pushed through. We built a really killer business. I partnered up with the Green Door guys so they can like help me learn how to manage a dispensary properly. They were great partners. We eventually ended up going public, which was great. We were the first plant touching business in America to uplist.
Is this Blum?
Yes.
Okay, so it's Blum, Oakland. And okay, because I know you had several different clubs, so I just want to be able to.
Yeah, so this is the Bloom TerraTech deal.
Yes.
And so, we were one of the first to go public, which essentially through AdNet and a couple other companies that we worked with, we basically wrote the rules that allowed for the SEC to like allow us to uplist, because how do you uplist a company who doesn't have banking, right? And so we had to be very strategic on how we did that. Mm-hmm. And that essentially made room for MedMen and GTI and everybody else.
So why did you guys choose to go public?
Well, it was kind of my financial partner at the time, because you needed a financial partner. It wasn't enough for me to just like be like, hi, I'm Salwa Ibrahim. I really want to do good things. They're like, that's nice, but you need a financial partner. So my financial partner at the time, which I took a lot of interviews of people who wanted to give me money. I interviewed with everybody. I had interviewed with people who were like, oh, get the permit, we'll give you money, see ya. Or like everybody wanted something different. So the guy who actually wanted the least amount, a gentleman by the name of Derek Peterson, he wanted 10%, but he was very clear on, hey, I want you to be a C Corp because it's easier to uplist as opposed to a non-for-profit or whatever we were able to be at that time. And he was like, my goal is to go public. And I was like, and at that time, I didn't even understand what that means. I was like, yeah, whatever, bro. So I was just happy that he wasn't being too greedy. And so that being said, like that was kind of always the aim.
Was that so he would have easier time raising additional funds to expand the business, or just the fact that traditional American businesses, the goal is to eventually go public? Like, what was his rationale for making? I know that was an expensive choice to choose to do that. You probably had to hire lawyers and consultants to figure out how to like navigate it properly.
Yeah, I think it was like exactly that, like to create a war chest to be able to go after other businesses and expand and like do other things.
Okay.
It was definitely one of those Steve Jobs things where it's like I got kicked out as soon as I did it. Like I did it and we uplisted and the keys got changed. But
now, was that because of your partner, or is that because of once money started coming in, it kind of dilutes you and that?
No, I think the partnership thought that they could do a better job. Yeah. Right. Which is fine. Like they bought it. Right. Yeah. That's up to them. And so at that point I had to like kind of recalibrate and figure out what I wanted to do next. And so, I basically, sat there and just kind of was like, what am I going to do next? And I remember my partner at the time was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to sell weed at concerts? I was like, yeah, that would be really cool. Let's do that. Like I was like super into that idea. Mm-hmm. And so because of my work on the Fox Theater project, I knew the guys at Another Planet Entertainment. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of started pitching them on the idea. I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool? Blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, it would be cool. Good luck, And so I started mapping out a path by which like we would change California law and change San Francisco law and time it to an event, which I do not recommend. That is the most stressful thing on the planet.
I can only imagine.
But we ended up doing it and it was great. And in 2019, we were essentially like the first cannabis company to compliantly sell weed at a major music festival. And so
Outside Lands?
Outside Lands.
Okay, so for folks who aren't in the area, Outside Lands is the biggest concert in Northern California right now. Probably.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
Like, it's huge. It takes over a big part of Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. Multiple days, huge number of acts. It's just like Coachella or Bonnaroo or whatever, all the other things they have around the country. And as all these events, they've always been places where people illegally sold a lot of weed. So the idea that you could actually have a legal part of the concert where you can go look at weed, consume weed, buy weed, that was revolutionary.
Yeah, and it wasn't even just like, oh, we had a stand and we were just selling. It was, we literally created, so what's interesting about this particular festival, they all have like wine lands and like they have all these local wineries come and they'll have like beer lands, same thing.
Lots of good food.
Well, yeah, and food, yeah, exactly. So ours was grasslands, and so it was like we literally constructed like a little mini city, and then we brought in the best of our industry to come and participate. So Canacraft at the time, Kiva at the time, there was 30 plus different cannabis companies in California that participated in this, and we straight up created a whole village. Yeah. And it was a complete experience. And then where we were, you could still see the main stage.
Yeah, it's a perfect place. Yeah.
Yeah, and we could still see the main stage, and so you could smoke, you can chill, you could do whatever, and you can like be at the concert, and it was beautiful. It was such a beautiful thing. I am grateful to have been a part of it. I'm grateful to have like birthed it. It's just, I will always be very proud of that project.
It's a really big deal. I've had the opportunity to have our brand Oakland Extracts there at the last couple of them through the Equity Trade Network. And because normally it's just expensive to get a booth there because it's a big ticket event, and it's worth the money. It should be an expensive event, but to have the opportunity to have a small brand there and to be able to have that interaction with the customers, that's the public in general, is a great opportunity. And you get to spend a weekend at a festival, so I kind of get the best of both worlds. And there's a bunch of good food. I ain't gonna lie. I leave, I get lost in the food area. I may or may not come back to my booth. I just start wandering, eating everything in sight, and so it's a whole trip. So it's really awesome going to Grasslands and seeing that kind of develop. So how did you go from Grasslands to then Cookies Oakland?
So I had a star-studded 2019. Like for me, 2019 was like the best year career-wise. So I spent the upfront part just preparing for Outside Lands. August hits. We do Outside Lands through Grasslands. It was like international media. It was on the cover of the LA Times. We were in the Bold Atlantic. Like we just had so much media coverage. It was great. And then 3 months later, I popped up with Cookies Oakland. Okay. So it was something that I'd been working on in the background. But truth be told, I don't even know how to say this right. It's like I inherited that dispensary permit from a friend of mine who had passed away. He was my coworker at Oaksterdam, and he didn't understand how to like fill out all the paperwork and stuff. And so he was like, oh, hey, you know, can you help me? When it transitioned from Richard Lee to him. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. No problem. Happy to do it. And so I filled out all the paperwork for him. And so unbeknownst to me, he left me on the paperwork saying if anything happened to him, that essentially the permit would transfer over to me. And so unfortunately, he had passed the year prior. And it was really important to me to make sure that everybody who worked at the company still had jobs. So that was my first step, was essentially making sure everybody stayed employed. And then I essentially worked on trying to figure out what would make it the most advantageous for the employees. I'm like, what is something that would make them proud and happy? But also like understanding that Blum, my first company, was right around the corner.
Yes.
So I'm essentially competing with myself. And so I was like, what can I do that's better than that, you know? And so the only thing I could think of is essentially becoming partners with Cookies. And so, and that did the trick, you know?
Makes sense. The biggest brand in cannabis.
Biggest brand in cannabis. They didn't have a footprint in the Bay Area yet. So it was like the first, because they had the Melrose store, and I think they may have had the Maywood store, and I think that Oakland may have been the third or fourth store.
Okay.
And so, but it was definitely the first one in the Bay Area. And so, I was just excited to be able to offer that to the staff, that they get to be part of this bigger brand and this bigger team. And it's just like having a new outlook on, you know, the future of like where this business can go. And so, yeah, after Outside Lands in August, we opened up Cookies Oakland in December.
So how was that after having not the best experience with your exit from Blum, were you nervous about collaborating with other people in this space? And did that affect how you chose your partners or just the experience at Blum?
Yes and no. It kind of depends on like the way you look at it and what your end goal is. And I think that that's actually a very important lesson for people coming into this business, regardless, is like you need to start with your end goal in mind. Is this like a job you want to have for the rest of your life? Are you trying to sell? Are you trying to be part of a bigger thing? Do you want to go public? Like, what does that look like? Because depending on what your end goal is, it's how you back into it and how you start, right? So for me, I had actually a great experience with Blum because I got financial freedom, right? That's something I wouldn't have ever experienced otherwise. And so as much as it bummed me out that I was not a part of it anymore, it was great for me personally. And I got to do fun, cool projects like Outside Lands, you know, that were more vanity than financial, you know? And so for Cookies, I was like, oh, well, I want to be part of this bigger team. And so I became like one of the earlier investors in Cookies, the brand, not just the store, the Oakland store. And so I saw it as like an opportunity to just align with a bigger brand than I could possibly start.
And so did they control management of the store? Were you able to influence things, or how, because I know a lot of people, they'll partner with a larger brand and different relationships give them different amounts of say over what happens at the store. And in certain cases, like if Cookies is coming to town, I might want to sit back and like kind of let them work their magic because they're good at what they do. So how much control did you have, and how did you feel about the nature of your relationship when you guys started that?
I think at that point, I didn't necessarily see myself going into the store every day. And I was willing to kind of give up a little bit more because I had an interest in the larger company.
Absolutely.
So if the larger company does well, it's like if it's not going to be in my right hand, it's going to be in my left hand. You know what I mean? So it's like it kind of didn't matter to me. But also, I think later on as the years went on, like it started not to pencil the way that we wanted it to. But I think it was a good learning opportunity for the company. I think it was a good learning opportunity for me as an individual. And so would I do it again? Yeah. I would do it again.
So working with, Cookies, I think they're good at many things, but Cookies marketing is huge in terms of the presence that they have in the market and the interest they have and the subculture they're really tapped into. What did you learn from working with them? Like for someone who's that, because they're so focused on marketing and they're such a brand, and it feels like a lot of the places like Bloom like created the brand Bloom as opposed to Cookies was Cookies before it kind of opened, kind of a thing. So it was already an established brand that was just continuing to grow. Were things that you were able to take away from that as just, that's interesting lesson learned, or maybe in the other direction, maybe there's things that you learned that I don't want to do this again like this, or what was your great learning experience from working with someone that large?
I feel like the thing that I learned that was actually really solidified for me was that cannabis is a fashion. Yeah. Right? Like the flavors are a trend. And, I don't want to say kids, but like, people, younger folks want to come in and they want to like take their picture in front of the cookie sign, and they want that bag, and they want to like be on Snapchat, like showing everybody what they bought from the store and opening it up and smelling and reacting. And like that whole fad of it is really fascinating. And also just how trendy it is and how the flavors come out so fast. The bags change so fast. It's amazing how quickly it happens. And so for us, like being in downtown Oakland, and that's another thing too, is like Bloom had a kind of a different demographic than Cookies Oakland. Cookies Oakland is heavy indica, like heavy indica, flower. They don't want the pre-rolls. They don't want the vapes. They don't want like these other things. They just want like the trendiest, heaviest indica possible. And that's what moved the needle for us. That being said, it was really great because the buying power of cookies, right? Like I remember in the beginning especially, but this was also as like, all the new regs were hitting. So it was a little difficult, and we were all trying to understand how to source and how to move product in a different capacity. But just being able to purchase with Cookies Melrose or take on some of Cookies Melrose's flavors, that was helpful for us. Absolutely. And just having that business relationship with other cookie stores and having that buying power with cookies was helpful.
Did not an important question, did it change the way you smoked? Because they were so indica heavy, and they were kind of more focused on probably the candy gas and kind of the flashier things out. Did you start consuming more of that, or did you?
Me personally, no. Okay. I'm a mom. I'm a sativa. I'm a pre-roll sativa. Give me like a little pre-roll. I can't do like the mini joints. I need more than that, but like
the
not
dog
too
walkers
much.
Are cute, but it's like I need 4 dog walkers, and what are we doing?
Yeah, I need like a little bit. It's too much paper. I don't like the paper to weed ratio with the dog walker.
Absolutely. So what came after Cookies Oakland, or how did you make the transition away from there?
So unfortunately, it's been operating, but unfortunately we just got robbed pretty badly. We had somebody take their car and just drive it through the front door. There was about 30 people who went in through the front door, just like kind of cleaned it out. And quite frankly, with all the regs and what's happening right now, it just doesn't seem advantageous to like get it back up and running. Yeah.
So for folks who aren't in this area, there's been a rash of break-ins at cannabis clubs in general in California, or everywhere, but in California in particular, and in the Bay Area in particular. I have several friends who own clubs, and you can go on YouTube and you can see the security footage of just people driving cars straight through the fence, or ram the fence 5 or 6 times. It's a stolen car, and then ram the car through the front door. There's a mob of people run in to come out with like $20 worth of trash. It doesn't make any sense.
But for us, like we were able to avoid it for a really long time. Like there was a period of time when this was happening in Oakland a lot, and we were somehow like not getting messed with. And I always attributed it to the fact that our building was like mostly concrete, and then I had a BART entrance in the and then the PG&E transformer right there. But these guys were able to find like the perfectly sized car and shimmy it just in the right spot to like be able to like.
I always wondered if having Dope Era next door might help, because like Mr. Fab doesn't want a bunch of mess happening around him either. So the building being so, like concrete, the BART station, and the neighbor being someone that people who might be doing these things know, kind of a thing.
I think that is very, in the beginning, absolutely that helped. I think that absolutely was like a thing that was like we bonded over that, right? And
for folks who don't know, Dope Era is a great clothing store owned by a local rapper, Mr. Fab. I guess that now he's more than a rapper. He's just a local luminary, but he's very, very well known in the area, and he's someone that could help keep things safe in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did. He absolutely did. But I think that because Oakland became so wild, wild west, and that they just straight up don't prosecute crime, and they don't chase criminals, and they don't do anything, you have people commuting into Oakland like it's their job, like they're clocking in to commit these crimes, and they don't know who Mr. Fab is, so they don't have that same respect. And so, yeah, like I said, it like for a long time, yeah, but unfortunately that ran its
gotten
course.
crazy. Like I know a bunch of clubs that are very, very connected in ways where they shouldn't be having these issues, but it's kids coming from out of town, it's entire crews coming from out of the area. It's just madness out there now.
Absolutely.
So, so since that guys are temporarily closed, what have you pivoted to focus your attention on? Because I know you've always been doing lots of different things. So,
yeah, right now I am trying to look at policy reform, right? So we in California are basically looking down the barrel of a gun. We have a CDTFA tax increase that's set to kick in. It's going to come into 19%. I know there's a lot of really smart folks who are working on trying to make sure that doesn't happen. We have the cultivation tax that's set to come back online at some point this year. And unfortunately, because of the way that the regulations are written, it's made it very, very difficult to conduct business. I've had many, many cannabis businesses, and at this point, I've had to shut them all down because it just doesn't pencil. Yeah. And so I'm sitting here going like, oh, do I get a job? Do I do this? Do I do that? And at the end of the day, it's like, I love cannabis. I love California cannabis. I love what we do. I'm very proud of what we've done. And so in order for me to stay in this business, we have to change the policy.
Yes.
And so that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. I think that the most important thing that we need to do is really come together, and we need to be united.
As an industry.
I think the reason why politicians have been able to pick us apart is because we don't have any consistent messaging, and whatever infighting we had has unfortunately spilled over into like these elected officials' ears and like these other legislative aides' ears, and it's just very sloppy. And so I think that we're getting better at sort of coming together and aligning because there's just a lot to align on. Mm-hmm. And so I think that our North Star is massive policy reform. How we get there, there's a couple of different ways, but I don't necessarily think that that's a conflict. I think that they can coexist because I think policy reform at any and all cost needs to happen, right? And so there's two different sort of efforts. There's one effort that wants to go through the legislator to be able to create reform through Prop 64 and just making amendments to the current laws that we have. Or there's a camp that is my camp where we want to do a brand new ballot initiative and essentially shit can Prop 64 and present a whole new set of laws. I like that idea because it's swifter, it's faster. Yeah, it's faster. I don't think we can survive that long to get that much change done through the legislator. I know that there's larger cannabis companies that would like to do it that way because it's cheaper. But at the end of the day, like the small guys can't last for 2, 4, 6 years in order to see all these changes. Whereas with a statewide ballot initiative, unfortunately, it is expensive, but we would be able to get swift change in potentially 2026.
So shifting from retail to policy advocacy, I mean, I imagine certain levels dealing with policy is a little bit more satisfying because you're kind of fighting the good fight. But it seems like it's a massive uphill battle, and especially in an environment where so few cannabis brands actually have the money to raise to come together. What are you finding as your biggest hurdle to being successful with this new campaign?
I think that the biggest hurdle right now is to try to give people hope. I think a lot of people don't have hope right now. I think that people are very much in survival mode.
Yes.
And what I've realized is like I've become the therapist for a lot of people, which is fine. I'm happy to, that's part of the job, you know? And so there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of this and that, where I think that when we get together for something like this, we can do it. And look, we've done it before, right? Like that's all we've ever done. Yeah. Like this is all we've ever done.
That's how we exist is people came together and made this work.
Right. Yeah. And like we've always just gone to city council meetings. We've always been politically active. Like political activism has always been the root of this industry.
Absolutely.
So for us to be like, oh well, now we're going to stop. Like, you know, this is all we do, you know? So I think that that's kind of the biggest thing. I think that if we can get 35 cannabis companies in California to kick in $10K each, we're out the door.
Yeah.
That gets us polling. That gets us like understanding what we're doing. And in my mind, the way I would like to run this is I would like us to write the language ourselves. I would like for every vertical to take their section and fix it for themselves, right? Having accounting be its own vertical so you can follow the dollar from end to end. Having media and events be their own verticals. And then essentially start stitching it together. And then anything that affects the whole, like the economics of the industry, we run it through an economic model that is essentially spearheaded by the economists over at UC Berkeley or UC Davis. And so that way we're making educated decisions on these reforms and these policies.
Well, I think it's important. I know so many small farmers have gone out of business, so many just small cannabis brands that have gone out of business. I don't know anyone who's doing well, but the amount of people that I've seen just quit and leave over the past 2 years has been astounding. And it's really been depressing.
But then it's like, but then what do we do?
What do we do? We can't all go. I mean, but it's just sad seeing so many people go that it's, and we need this change. How do I ask this without sounding really pessimistic? Do you think it's still worth it for someone to try to start a cannabis business in California today, given the current set of regulations?
If it were me, no.
Okay. Yeah, no,
I wouldn't.
Yeah, short answer is truth. Yeah, I mean, it's just treacherous out there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit.
I mean, in the compliant market, no.
Yeah, I forgot. There's the whole other market where
in the
people are
compliant market.
Yeah, if you want to pay taxes, be legal. This isn't the best space for you. So Salwa Ibrahim. Tell me about your cultural background.
I am Egyptian. I was born in Cairo, and my father passed away when I was a year old. But then I got adopted when I was 3 by his sister who lived in Walnut Creek, California. And so I came to California as an almost 4-year-old and basically have been living the American dream ever since.
Excellent.
But I got raised in a relatively picturesque like childhood in the sense of like I was able to play outside and like, had, good schools and stuff like that. My mother was the breadwinner mostly. She worked for Bechtel. She was an architect. My father was a classically trained artist, but he basically took care of the kids and always made sure we were fed and all that. And but we were like raised like pretty conservative Muslim family.
Okay. So how did they feel when you got into the cannabis industry?
Oh my gosh, I hid it from them for so long. I was scared. Yeah. I was super scared for them to know, and I was super scared for their judgment. I was super scared because it's like if you do something that's shameful, it's like not just shame on you, it's shame on them. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like Absolutely. One of those things. And so it's like if I were to ever get caught or I would ever go to, God forbid, to jail or anything like that, it's shame on them,
Absolutely.
And that's the type of culture we were raised with. But I got to the point with Prop 19 where I was doing some media and I was like, uh-oh, they're going to find out.
You're on television. It's going to come up.
Someone's going to read something, And so I like literally had like a formal meeting with my parents where I was like, hey, and prior to this, when I was working at the Fox Theater, I was also raising money for elected officials. So I was raising money for Obama and Clinton and Schwarzenegger at the time and Gavin Newsom and all of these really fancy people that I have like my picture with. And so my parents thought, like, just looking at that, they're like, oh, she's okay. She'll be okay, And so
she's going in the right direction.
She's going in the right direction. Yeah. We don't have to worry about her. And so
little did they know.
Yeah. Little did they know. And so I, had to sit there with them and kind of explain it to them. But the way I pitched it to them was like, hey, this is something that I'm personally passionate about because it's just a plant and I don't think it's right that people are in jail for it. And so I, again, pitched policy reform, which obviously was Prop 19, so it's not that far off. And it's also not that far from what I'm doing now, huh? Starting to see a pattern.
Yeah. Fighting for change.
Fighting for change. And so I kind of pitched them this whole thing and was explaining to them why it's important to me. And my parents, thank goodness, are like educated people. So they let me like give my monologue and then they're like, okay, we'll see you in a couple days, We'll
sit on this.
Yeah, we're going to sit on this. And so they did their research. They talked to like my aunties and my uncles and like whatever and got a consensus. And so they came back and they're like, we've decided it's okay.
Okay.
I was like, but it was one of those things where it's like, we just don't want you to get hurt. And so similar to how, and I remember my mom very distinctly saying this, she was like, oh, well, similar to how, you know, people who lead these movements, like I think she actually said gay rights, the people at the front are the ones who get hurt.
Absolutely.
So she was like, we just don't want you to be the one of the people getting hurt. And so I was like, okay. And I actually took that to heart. I went from being kind of more on the forefront of the Prop 19 campaign. And then I kind of like pulled back a little bit from that just out of respect for them. But it got to a point too where it's like, I can't ask my parents for money. They don't have money like that, right? Like I have to be completely sovereign. I have to be my own independent person. So therefore I cannot make decisions based off of their expectations. And so the more successful I got and I became, the more I could help them. But that eventually is risk reward, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's like I learned how to like live for myself and like just being really okay with the consequences thereof. But also just having them in the back of my mind of like, I can't disappoint them, you know?
So how much of was there concern about you being in cannabis being the fact that it's been illegal and it's dangerous in that regard, or the ethics or the morality of just cannabis in general? Like, were they anti-cannabis as well as worried about your risk, or were they just more worried about the risk and they don't really have a negative opinion about the plant?
You know what's funny is that like, I don't even think my parents even have the concept of like, I would smoke weed for fun. I don't think that's something. I was like, I don't think that's. I think that my dad was the one who was very anti, even for medical, right? But like through, you know what it was? Now I'm remembering the lotions. I'm a huge advocate for the lotions and the topicals.
Topicals are the gateway.
The topicals are gateway, right? So I bring home a topical, and like I remember my dad like he had a shoulder thing, and I put it on. He was like, but he would never admit it's the cream, right? And then all of a sudden the cream's gone, and he was like, oh well, my shoulder hurts again. It's like, oh, it couldn't have been the cream, you know?
Medicine
that
works.
Was helping, and so through that was very helpful. And then also the discussions of like my parents are so customized to their medicine coming in pill form, right? Like they're more comfortable with that. Well, where do those pills come from? They eventually come from plants, right? And so it's like, why wouldn't you? God put this plant on this earth. Well, God doesn't want you to like blah blah. I'm like, you know. So we have these whole philosophical conversations. But I think that what helped me out is like I have a couple cool uncles that were like, hey, what you got? You know? And so I think them being more open to what I do versus my parents necessarily being open to what I do was helpful too.
That was actually going to be my next question about uncles, or about was there anyone in the family or historically were people comfortable with hash? Was that okay? Or are there people in your family that smoked hash or okay with hash versus what's happening here now and our perceptions about the plant in America?
Not in my particular family. My family is very like academic, very, which is funny because I'm like the only one who didn't graduate college. Like even with my nieces and my nephews, like everyone has multiple. I'm the only one who didn't, and you know, they're like, "Oh, don't ask for life advice from any auntie except for her." You know, don't do what auntie does. Like, you know.
But I don't know. I'm sure the young people kind of like it.
I know. Yeah. Well, they don't get mad at it at Christmas for sure. But yeah, so my family in particular is pretty strict.
Are you plugged into the Egyptian community here, or is it just through your family?
No, it's just through my family. I know Sharif El Sisi from Garden of Eden.
Yeah. Sharif's the man. I love Sharif.
Yeah, and that was my first. I was like, whoa, there's another Egyptian. He was like, oh, there's a lot of us. I'm like, really?
Quietly, yeah.
Yeah. And so he was kind of like my first fellow Egyptian that I ran into.
I got to get him on there. I used to go to Garden of Eden so much back in the day, and he was always like a big supporter of the brand. Like, bring it in, we'll take care of you. And then they got trees going, and now they're just doing everything everywhere. But he's always been a good person to talk to, person to know.
Yeah, he's very inspiring. Yeah. He's very, very inspiring. I just love the way he can pivot so fast. Yeah. So
super
smart.
Hard worker too. You're smart, works really, really hard. I mean, it's scary how like all of my favorite people in the industry, when I see how hard they work, it's like, damn, like I aspire to be that focused and all that, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
It is
successful
a lot of work.
In this space.
It is a lot of work.
So, how do you feel like your cultural background is either helped push you forward in the space or made it more difficult for you to succeed in the space? Or do you feel like it's had any relationship to that on either side? That's always a mouthful of a question. Every time I do this, I'm trying to figure out a more concise way of answering it. But I feel like sometimes our cultural backgrounds can kind of like set us up for success in certain areas, like either through networking or just perseverance or whatever.
Is it weird to think that I feel like I haven't reaped the benefit of it yet?
No, not at all.
Because I feel like Middle Easterners and Arabs are kind of like the most forgotten. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like at some point, like, we're going to be like, okay, and us too, we want our rights, you know? Don't forget about us. I think, like, the most recently when I had a school form that I had to fill out for one of my kids, it was like, oh, what nationality are you? And I don't know what to pick because there's still no box for me. Yeah. Like, but they're starting to incorporate Middle Eastern.
Would the answer be Middle Eastern American, Arab American, Persian American?
Like, I would take North African. I would take Middle Eastern. Mm-hmm. So Egypt's interesting because it's like, yes, I'm African, but yes, I'm Arab, right? Mm-hmm. So, but I also identify as both, right? But like I said, it's like even till this day, there's forms that like still don't like accommodate us. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's changing. That being said, it's like, I think that a lot of Middle Eastern cultures are starting to adopt it more. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing that there's sheikhs that are coming out that are pro-medical cannabis, pro-CBD. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's shift in that perception's changing. Obviously, hashish has been part of the culture forever. But there's just such a taboo in our culture here in America, at least in the community that I'm a part of, as far as it being a part of your daily life.
It's interesting. A lot of the idea for this show is that we wanted to kind of create a pathway for other folks who kind of want to be in the industry. People who are looking at it from afar and trying to figure out how they can see their place in it. What would be the number one recommendation you would make for someone who wants to be an entrepreneur in the cannabis space, that wants to start a business wherever they are in the country in cannabis? Like, what were some of the main recommendations you would give for them?
I would say, like, for me, when I worked under Richard, it was really, really the best lessons ever. And it was learning and it was studying, but then also, like, you're not spending your money learning these things, right?
Oh, the train just goes. It's just part of Oakland. We just leave it in.
Okay, just curious.
A little flavor. I appreciate it. But if folks have been watching at this point and realize we're in the town, that's the train. It is what it is. Gotta love it.
Amazing. So I think that, like, if look, I always think that I am my own best case study, right? Like, what do I need? Like, what do I like? I like topicals. I like sativas. I like pre-rolls. I like this. I like a certain amount of cannabis. Like, I don't want to, like, re-spark an old joint. I just don't like that. Like, I want it to be a certain amount. Like, so it's like, start with yourself, start with your own needs, start with what you're seeing that you would like, and if there's any holes or gaps in the market, right? Absolutely. Whether it be product or price point, and try to see if you can bridge that gap. The next thing I would suggest is to get a job in whatever vertical it is that you want to be in. So if it's topicals that you want to be in, try to find a topical manufacturer that's local. Try to get an entry-level job anywhere. I've always gotten my jobs by, like, persisting. Like, I'll show up to the front door of a place, like, every day. Like, being like, do you need something? Do you need something? Do you need something? And that's how I got, like, my first 2 jobs that essentially propelled my career. So, like, just being relentless and, like, trying to get a job in the space, because the learning you will get from just working in that environment will set you up for success. You'll see what they do that you like, what they do that you don't like, what things that you would change, what things that you would want to accommodate. So that's where I would start. Okay.
And so what are some of the things that you would warn people not to do? What do you think are some common mistakes that you see new people come in when they come into the space making, so they cannot make the same mistake? That did not come out worded very well. Let me try that again. What would you recommend people not do if they want to be successful in this cannabis space?
Don't overlook the good advice from veterans that are in the industry. It's amazing how many of us sort of make it look easy. and how much our advice is overlooked by people, and how much we're discredited because for whatever reason, whatever stereotypes people have in their mind. And so that's number one. Number two is I would hesitate as much as possible to spend money. So don't be so easily separated from your money. Just try to learn as much as you can before entering the market, before spending a dime.
You've worked with some very strong partners in this space. What would you, what kind of recommendation would you give for trying to pick the right partner, or what to look out for with the partners? Because it's like everyone I know who's had strong partners, it's gone both ways in terms of there's been positive and there's been negative. So what would you warn people to look for before they start making a deal with somebody or getting in bed with a larger company?
I think that communication's really like, I feel like I'm a very clear communicator. I'm like, this is my expectation of you. This is when I want you to do it. Can you do it? Yes or no? Are you sure? Okay, I'm going to check in with you now. I'm going to check in with you there. I'm going to, like, that's the way I roll. I think that like being that sort of micromanaging in the beginning before you, like, as you're building a rapport is important, because like you need to be lockstep with your partner along the path and making sure that you guys work well together. I think breaking bread, that's, I think, a cannabis tradition, right? Like, you got to do it. You got to make sure you can like have a meal with a person, look them in the eye, understand who they are, understand like what type of human they are. And I think that liking your partners is kind of a big deal too. Like, you know, I don't want to say like you guys don't have to be best friends, but just like respecting them, right? It's like if somebody's really good at accounting, they might not have the best social skills, but like, guess what? They're really good at accounting, and you can respect that.
Oh yeah.
So,
with accounting.
Yeah, exactly. And so, just really kind of knowing who these people are. Obviously, contracts at this stage in the game are really, really important. Making sure that you read it. It's not enough that your lawyer reads it. You have to actually read it.
That's a mistake I make. I like to give it to the lawyer. Like, you read this, but I should really spend more time going over the dots and the I's and T's.
You have to do it. Yeah. And then in addition to that, just kind of really trying to figure out if there's extra fail safes that you can put in for yourself, and understand what you're really bringing to the table, right? Is it sweat equity? Is it a brand? Is it all you? And like somebody else is just like propping you up? Like what is that worth, right? And making sure that you're okay with your deal. I think a lot of people go into these, it's so funny to me. I swear, like, a lot of people go into these deals not thinking they're real. Like, they're like, you know what I mean? They're like, oh, I'm going to sell this company for $100,000, but don't worry, I'll sell it again later. You're like, no, you sold it, you know? And so, yeah, those days are over where you can do stuff like that. Contracts actually matter.
Yes, they do. Lawyers matter. Lawyers and accountants matter.
Yeah.
So how old are your kids?
I have an almost 9-year-old and a 3-year-old.
And so how is it managing being in this space, or how do you communicate what you do in this space? Obviously not to the 3-year-old, but to the 9-year-old. Are they old enough to understand what cannabis is?
Oh yeah, my kids have grown up with being around it, in the sense of like over COVID, we were basically lived on a farm, and like we had hemp growing and whatever. And I think it's funny because like growing up for me, wet paint was like the smell of my childhood because my parents were in construction. But for my kid, I'm pretty sure it's going to be the smell of cannabis. Cause,
not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, just because of the nature of it. And I'm really proud of it. I think that my narrative to my kid was always like, oh, hey, mommy and daddy grow plants, and these plants are medicine and they help people. And smoking is an ancient method of ingestion. Like, that's just what human beings used to do for years and years and years, right? And so, and then also explaining to her, showing her videos of, you know, kids with epilepsy and them being relieved of their ailments through cannabis and things like that. And so they have pride in it, right? And it would be a disservice of me being like, hey, I'm providing you this life and I'm paying for your school stuff and all this stuff through this plant, but then be me not taking pride and having shame around it. That's weird to me, right? So I always, prior to Prop 64, I was always very proud of the idea of like having a family business, and a business that my daughter would hopefully one day inherit. But hopefully, again, that may or may not be the future. But
so I know a lot of concerns that parents have around their kids knowing about what's going on with cannabis is the propensity for kids to talk to other kids. Does your kid know what they should or shouldn't share? Or are they just run around talking about weed at school? Like how does
No, I actually asked my daughter this the other day. I was like, "Oh, Isla, when do people ask, what you do, what mom and dad do?" And she goes, "I honestly don't know." That's her response. She goes, "I have no idea what you guys do."
It's a very teenage answer. I don't know and I don't care.
Yeah, legit. So that's as much as I want to think that she's talking about her parents, she don't give up.
That makes it easier though.
We're not cool. We're not Harry Potter. She doesn't care.
Again, it makes it easier. The last thing you want to do is have her run around the school, turn everyone, and have to deal with that parent teacher.
I mean, yes and no. Like I have my magazine cover hanging up in my house.
Yeah.
Like it's mommy on the front cover with surrounded by cannabis plants. You know what I mean? So it's any birthday party, any type of play date that we have, I'm not taking that down.
Yeah, absolutely. So do people at the school know, have you ever had any dealings with the teachers or there's perceptions from them about what's going on at home because they know that you're in the industry?
No, it's not like that anymore, I don't think. My daughter at one point she's not anymore, but she was at a very, 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 very fancy private school. And so in order to get in, you have to fill out all these essays and all this stuff. And so and they're going to Google you, And so I just really leaned into it. And you're like, we're doing a good thing. Policy reform, getting people out of jail. Like this is a medicine, an alternative medicine for people. It's better than an alternative source for moms who are stressed out and don't want to pop a pill.
It's way better than pills. Killing each other with the pills right now.
It's awful.
All right, so that's excellent. I don't have kids myself, but I often wonder about like how to communicate that, and I have so much cannabis in my life. It's always fascinating to hear how parents kind of deal with that. So.
I think when you start you're talking, for us, it was always a conversation because my ex and I were, business partners. So it's like we were just constantly talking about it. So she doesn't know any different, and she also doesn't care.
It's boring. It's work talk. It's parents' work talk.
Which is honestly kind of what I'm hoping, right? So it's like you always want to be the opposite of your parents. So she was like, "Oh, my parents are into weed. I'm going to go read."
I know a few kids like that where their parents big smokers and their kids and I'm always nervous about coming around the house. Like I don't want to offend the kids because I don't care about what you old people are doing. I'm going to go read a book. I'm going to go ride my bike. You guys are boring. You guys old people smoke weed. It's like I don't want to know what you kids are doing if you think this is for old people, but
they're reading books.
Yeah, hopefully. Just lots of books.
Lots of books. Lots of Harry Potter.
That's awesome. So assuming this, and not assuming, but when this policy change happens and we're able to fix some of the policy issues that we're having in California, what would be your desire for the next step?
Ooh, like for policy-wise?
No, for you, for your dream.
For me?
If you could get past the policy stuff, what would you like to be doing?
Honestly, like for me, okay, if we're doing fantasy,
fantasy land.
that's my spike the football and do the touchdown and bounce. I was like, I want to be I help fix it for y'all. I'm out.
Okay, cool.
That's,
what would you go do?
I don't know.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think I fantasize about other things, but it's just this. It's just lots of cannabis right now.
Yeah. I would do something in media. I'd love to do something in media. I'd love to do anything really. Honestly, I would want to just sit on boards.
Yeah.
Just let me sit on your board. I'll help direct your ship.
Give you some good advice.
Yeah, I'll give you good advice. I've been through a lot of shit.
Well, I'm definitely excited about the media projects you're working on. I think it's a fruitful venture. And so, do you want to talk about that or kind of leave that or?
The show? Yeah. I don't even know how I would even talk about it.
Well, you've had involvements in Hollywood before, because I remember, I first met you randomly at some Oaksterdam event, after I'd graduated and I was just coming to some event, and you're around at these events. So I've seen you around, and then I've had a lot of friends who worked for you either at Blum or Cookies Oakland, so your name kept kind of popping up. But then randomly, you'd be in the cannabis magazines. I see you next to Snoop Dogg. I see you next to all these other kind of famous people. So it seems like you've had forays into the entertainment space. So you want to talk about that a little bit? What you've done, or what you've been thinking about doing, or how did you just become so well known with all these people?
I think the only reason it's because of just what I did in cannabis, right? So it's my sort of leadership in the industry, or wanting to be progressive in the industry, allowed me to sit at those tables. So it was never me necessarily pursuing media or pursuing famous people or anything like that got me in those doors. It was just being really good at my job that got me in those doors. Whereas now, so one of the things that we've been talking about, and I'm just going to put it out there, is, if you're talking about a statewide ballot initiative, that's a lot of money, right? It's anywhere between $0 to $20 million, depending on who you ask. They'll say crazy numbers. But the bid I got was up to 20 million. And so most of that, I would say about 65% of that is educating the California public as to why they need to vote on California cannabis reform.
Absolutely.
And so in my mind, I'm sitting here going, how do you cut that budget? Nobody has money like that. Like, what are we going to do? And so I was like, oh, we need a reality show. If we have a reality show, then we can educate the California public and we don't have to make that spend. And so that was kind of like what I've been thinking about right now and what I've been trying to pitch. And so it would just honestly, and again, it's like, it's really to help do the job. It's to help us showcase to the American public, this is how you change a law. This is how you organize. This is how you get everybody on the same page. But also it's like when certain policy groups or advocacy groups start fucking with you, they kind of can't because they're on camera. Yeah. And so it's kind of nice in the sense because it's like a shield and a weapon. And so we're sitting here going like, hey, we need a reality show. Not just to cut the budget, but to also to protect ourselves personally. And so that's kind of the dream right now.
Okay. So you're going to do a reality show about just folks trying to change the policy and the impact of the policy on businesses in California and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So it's telling everybody's stories, the sacrifices we've made to get to this point, because how much we've had to sacrifice and now the current fruit of that sacrifice doesn't match.
Yes.
It's not okay. And so that's one part of it. The second part of it is like getting everybody in the room and then actually writing this law, right? And then having everybody hash it out. I'm sure that's going to be, that's going to be fun. That'll be fun to watch at least. And then in addition to that, it's also kind of exposing how politics works, right? So you've got lobbyists who literally barter policy in exchange for other policy, right? So it's like, you got puppies mixed with old people mixed with cannabis, with all these things. And like, they just get mishmashed around and they get bartered to pass other bills, right? So that's not okay. And I don't think that the American public understands really how that works. And so I just would like to take everybody along for the ride.
Yeah. Show the sausage making.
Yeah.
When I was on the Oakland Cannabis Regulatory Commission, I worked very closely with their city council, and city politics can be very depressing. Yeah. Just like seeing who is able to have power, how people have power, how much of it's just about campaign donations and people who are financially back certain people, and talking to folks in their office and they feel one way, but then money comes in and kind of impacts their decisions later. It can be very demoralizing.
But imagine if they were on camera.
Change a lot.
They have to stay honest.
I often wonder whatever happened to, was it Melissa Hagg?
Oh, Melinda.
Melinda Hagg. She was the.
Everybody hated her.
Yeah, she was the federal prosecutor for Northern California.
Everyone hated her.
And she caught so much stuff in the press. And like, I didn't like her either. I didn't like what she was doing. But every once in a while, like, this is a human being. They probably have kids.
Oh, no.
Like,
people were at her house.
Yeah. I've always wondered, like, I mean, I'm sure she's far, far away from us, but I'm curious about, because she was on Front Street, because Harborside was in the news. So many people were in the Oaksterdam was in the news. The feds were in the news, so we had a face to attach to these people coming in and doing these raids. I can't imagine it felt good. So
no.
I think that it is important to be able to publicize all this so that it kind of like shames people into better behavior, hopefully. Like, you don't need to be like such an obstruction. Like, these are good people. These are small family farms, small business owners that are trying to just sustain themselves. No one's trying to get rich. People just want to exist. Yet you keep creating these hurdles, these impediments to people having just basic success. It's just not fair.
Yeah. Look, like I said, the route I'd like to take is like Fast and Furious, right? Like, just, it's a little expensive. It's expensive, but it's fast. It fixes it. And we can, and I'm completely oversimplifying a very, very complicated thought. Otherwise, like, the other group that wants to go for the change is through the legislative effort. And it's just going to be a long haul.
That'll take a decade. Yeah. So 30 cannabis brands in California or anywhere that can still afford things that want to affect change.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely just reach out. But thank you so much for being here. I was super excited to talk to you. Really would love to work with you on some of these other things you have going. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for listening. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
It's been an honor. Thank you.